the rise of global value chains. So what is a global value chain? I've put here on the screen a very technical definition by Jeraffe and Fernandez Stark at Duke University, where they define the value chain as the full range of activities that firms and workers do to bring a product, whether that product is a good or a service, from its conception to its end use and beyond. The whole process of creating something and all the activities that go into it. This chain of production has been fragmenting. You'll see this jargon unbundling across different industries and borders. So this long chain of activities, which in the old days was all bundled together in one house, one factory, is now becoming unbundled into fragmented pieces of activity, some of which are outsourced and offshored across a border, creating a global value chain or a regional value chain. And this process is the manifestation today of globalization and regional economic integration. So the outcome of our globalizing and trading more extensively with each other is that the production that used to take place inside one location, one physical building often, is now unbundled across borders. These days, trade can no longer be understood in terms of finished goods or services. It is no longer about exporting or importing the entire final product produced by one firm at one location in one country and delivered to an unrelated party, a customer in another country. That's what international trade used to be about, but today the production of goods and increasingly also of services involves a combination of intermediate inputs, a whole string of different separate activities, some of them sourced from all over the world, brought together to make up a finished output for the final market. Any of those activities, any one of those separate intermediate inputs can be thought of as a business function and can become the core competence of a different firm, and therefore can be outsourced to that different form. Most of them can also be offshored, meaning outsourced to an offshore location. This is delivering new competitive opportunities both for different countries and for different firm level specialization. The World Economic Forum has said that the world economy's backbone and central nervous system is this resulting system of global supply or global value chains. We used to call them global supply chains. We refer to them now as global value chains because what we are interested in is at which point along that chain is most value added. So cross-border supply chain activity is often at a regional level, and it has been most pronounced in the most geographically integrated parts of the world, which are the European Union and East Asia. It's worth looking at the evolution of the global value chain phenomena over the last several decades. If we go back to the 1960s, the story was all about vertically integrated firms. By the time we got to the 70s, we were seeing investment in offshoring by multinational corporations. By the 80s, we started to see this unbundling within a firm, whereby the firm outsourced and offshored into these supply chains. By the 1990s, the story was the rise of China and very big new global supply chains dominating most of the world's manufacturing. And in the 2000s, it's been the rise of India, where we now have the widespread application of digital technology, the beginning of services, global value chains, and emergence of new knowledge and innovation networks. What this translates to is a system of production whereby what we call trade in intermediates from one business to another business, B2B trade, has become twice as important as trade in the final product. Now, I wish this was a news story, but it is not a news story. There is the data back 1990, back to 2010. And the blue part is the intermediate goods, the B2B trade. And you can see that right through this period, it has been roughly 50% or more, and that has been the story for a very long time. These global value chains and the importance of intermediate goods and business-to-business trade was not noticed until the 2000s. But the reality is, we've been living with this. This is the way firms work. This is the way trade happens for a very long time. I just want to give you some quick examples. This is the Nutella value chain. We think of Nutella as being Italian, perhaps, Ferrero Group, but look at where all the different intermediates come from, including Australia, Malaysia, Turkey, France, Brazil, Nigeria. This is a major agricultural processed food value chain. This is the Barbie doll. Important here to see that a couple of key activities take place in California. It's designed in California, the quality testing is done in California, and much of the packaging is also done in California. I point that out because those are very high-end value-added activities. The design is a critical services component. The quality testing is a critical services component. The packaging and marketing is also a critical services, very upstream and downstream. You can't begin to make a Barbie doll without the design. This is a very upstream activity, right back at the thought, the imagination, the design of the doll. And downstream, very downstream, the last thing before selling to a final consumer is the packaging. So California is doing both the very upstream and very downstream high value added activities. Meanwhile, the cloth for Barbie's dolls comes from Mexico, the clothes are made in China, the hair is made in Japan, the doll is actually finally put together in Indonesia and Malaysia. Again, the Barbie doll is made all over the world. This is a toy dog, which is again made for a San Francisco-based company. And you can see, again, its bits come from everywhere. I want you to look at some of those services components. Voice recognition. The voice recognition is a very high value-added part of this dog because it would not have the interest as a toy if it couldn't talk. The voice recognition programming done in association with San Francisco is done in Taiwan. The speaker is made in Dongguan, and you see there all the different aspects of the transistor and wiring done in different parts of East Asia, and the physical goods that go into making him. The microfiber for his coat comes from Korea, for example. So again, this is a dog that is not made in the world. It's certainly made in APEC. We go from the United States through to East Asia there. This is one of many different pictures I could show on the iPhone. But again, you can see the individual bits, and this is really only displaying the key goods components of the iPhone, finally assembled in Shenzhen at the moment by Foxconn, which is a Chinese Taipei company, and various other parts coming, including in from Germany and Korea, Japan, etc. So the iPhone again is made on a global basis. This is the iconic picture which the WTO chose to use when it introduced the notion of made in the world, because it started to be understood that our balance of payments measures were not measuring accurately what was going on. The balance of payments only measures the final price of a good or service that enters across the final border. Whereas in fact, there are many borders being crossed here by many pieces and services that go into bringing this, the Dreamliner to fruition. And here you can see the final assembly was still done when this picture was drawn by Boeing in the United States. This slide just shows you how strong the regional dimension to global value chains can be. This is the automobiles network, if you like, and you can see very, very strongly the two big centers. The red center is East Asia, and the green is essentially Europe and North America, but they play in different spaces. This is not really global. There are regional dimensions to this. Similarly for electronics, here you see the East Asian story is very strong at the center of this, but again, there is a regional European aspect to it as well. I'm going back now to Boeing and to the Dreamliner to show you something else that is going on. First of all, Boeing itself is transforming as the process of unbundling and fragmentation takes place. So we go back on the left-hand side there to the start of the 737 production line, and you can see that most of the plane, all of the red parts there, were built by Boeing in-house. By the time we got to the 747, about 20% was outsourced, and you can see that Boeing is hanging on there to the wings, to the fuselage, the nose gear. The wing structure is dominating there in what they're holding on to. And now the 787 Dreamliner, look how much has been outsourced and how very, very little is retained by Boeing itself. Boeing now really only makes in-house the tail fin. And again, here we have a services story. The tail fin is ultimately the aerodynamics, along with the wings, but particularly that tail fin. By the time we're at the 787, the very, very high value added in the Dreamliner is in that very small piece of metal. The good, it's the smallest part of the plane, it's the highest value added in terms of its services content. This is a quick picture of the iPod, bit different from the iPhone, but the story is very similar. China only gets about $4 per unit in a piece of equipment that sells for roughly $300 US. What is happening here is China is doing the assembly, the final assembly. But all of those business intermediates are coming from somewhere else. Some of them are coming from the US, some are coming from other parts of East Asia, some of them are services components, some of them are goods components. But what we start to see here is the final assembly is not the high value added activity. The final assembly is the old-fashioned manufacturing, the actually putting of it together. This is a slide that showed in the old days what the Nokia N95 looked like inside, and you can see the green is what you could roughly call the services components. The grey pieces up the top are all goods. The whole series of very high value added internal support functions. Very hard to early on define what they all were, but then we can see at the very downstream end, distribution and retailing, very important in the overall value add. Final assembly there in yellow, tiny, 11 euros for the final assembly. It is not the activity that will deliver the highest return to any firm. So there is much debate on whether this story of global value chains is going to continue into the future. We hear a lot about onshoring and reshoring, but the global evidence suggests, even despite the new policy positions emerging following COVID-19 responses, that industry is continuing to internationalise. The production process is continuing to fragment across borders, and I believe the global value chain phenomenon is really here to stay. It's here to stay, and the services intensity of total production is increasing, which I think you have seen in some of those slides. For those of you who would like to think about what this might mean for you, I'm just providing a quick exercise here. Think of a lead firm that makes a good, that makes one of these. And then think, where do they get all the bits for it from? What are the first tier suppliers, and where do the first tier suppliers get all their bits? And not just bits, some of the things are services. Think about what that supply chain, this is an old-fashioned supply chain, might look like. And then think also about how you might map the value chain activity. So this is a typical description. You start with the idea, the innovation, you have your primary production inputs, you have your secondary processing, then the manufacturing, the storage, the handling, all those services aspects coming in very downstream, close to market and your final consumers. I want to suggest that you take a firm and think about it. Take a product. Think about what is the process. And as you think about it, ask, are any of these components likely to be traded and to be being brought in from overseas? Are any of these components services? And where along your value chain that you're drawing, where is the greatest value add likely to lie?